Hello, hello, and good afternoon today on this Wednesday for a Halloween week. I'm Laura Goldman, the dietitian with Premier Weight Loss, and it's a pleasure to have you all here joining me today because this is a very seasonally specific topic, although you might notice that some of the items that we touch on actually pertain to year round. And if you've been with me for the past few weeks or presentations, you'll probably recognize a few things that we talk about, but it's always nice to see how we can manage it from this seasonal perspective. So as you know, it's all about managing those sugar cravings, hopefully without guilt, especially as we have trick-or-treaters joining us and maybe bringing us back some spoils, and how to navigate the abundance of candy. Remember, as always, it's the quality of your calories that matters. Even when it comes time to treats, then we want to make sure that we emphasize having high quality calories instead of too many of the not as helpful calories that you can get from sweets, but they're still allowed. So what we're going to cover today, briefly, we'll touch on what's behind those cravings, as well as GLP-1 medications and how you may navigate your cravings with those. Continuing on with managing cravings, there are some mindful strategies to approach that. So we'll touch on those. And a reminder of how to allow small indulgences without guilt. And this new thing that I've started, I have enjoyed, is setting up some goals for the week. And we'll offer a few new goals that maybe will sound appealing. And as always, I like to leave room for your questions at the end. To briefly understand cravings, and I have this image that came from an article that I will not do it justice describing, but there are two main pathways that affect our hunger, essentially. We have the homeostatic, or the pathway of wanting to keep things the same. So I'm hungry, therefore I must eat to continue metabolism and functioning throughout the day. And then we have the hedonic pathway, which is I want to eat because it makes me feel good, and all the pleasure-based things that are, that we associate with food. And unfortunately, hedonic pathways, they're generally the ones that win. It's sort of this whole gas pedal is always on situation. And when we look for, because the hedonic pathway also activates those feel-good hormones. So if we're talking about dopamine in our brain, so that pathway tends to take over because we do get pleasure from it. And this image here talks about sort of we have those satiety and hunger signals that come from our gut, which can influence our appetite, but we also have sensory factors and how things can be appealing. Also our mental factors. So what are our beliefs about the food? Are we influenced by advertising? And the brain mechanisms, of course, can sort of interact with all of that. And we have those satiety signals, but there's also that reward seeking. And again, like I said, I didn't do much justice there, but I do find it very interesting how the palatability and the desirability of food can really impact whether or not we're going to seek out to eat more, even if we don't necessarily feel hungry. Also, cravings can be largely influenced by stress and fatigue, as well as some seasonal changes with the shorter days. Mood changes can possibly lead toward wanting to eat food for comfort. Also, with the holiday season ramping up, we know that we've got lots of social events probably coming onto the calendar. Maybe we have the nostalgia of the hot cider that one of our family members prepared every year. And also, sometimes this is also a period of time of extra stress or a higher level emotions. positive or negative. And so there may be some emotional eating factors as well. When it comes to cravings and GLP-1 medications, the good news is a lot of people will report that cravings decrease for them while taking it. In fact, someone I spoke with just the other day had told me that while he used to love a specific type of chip, that has not been very appealing to him anymore. And he found that very interesting, but he was also, it was a welcome change for him. However, some people will still have intense cravings for very specific foods. Maybe it's not the one that perhaps you used to crave, but there's something else out there. And also, I've talked to people who will say that, yes, I don't crave specific foods, but I still have this habitual desire or this emotional desire to eat. So remember, you may feel fuller faster, but there are these mental associations with sweets and also savory foods, and they will persist. So the GLP-1 medications do a lot of really good work, but there still is a component that we have to sometimes address as well. As you may know, I've talked a lot about mindful eating, and now we talk about mindful Halloweening, if you will. And remember that mindful eating, it does involve that awareness of the food. Ask yourself, what am I eating? When am I eating it? Why am I eating it? How much? And mindful eating also is a perspective where we tune into our hunger and fullness cues, which that's the nice thing about the GLP-1s is that those medications can actually help us recognize our hunger and fullness at that time. But remember that there is no judgment involved, or that's the goal anyway, is to not have any judgment associated with food. Because remember, foods aren't necessarily good or bad. We don't want to think of them in those terms, but instead try and imagine or think about this food will help me reach my health goals, and this food will not really align with my goals quite as well, because that is true. There are some foods that are very, very helpful and healthy, and we know that, and other foods that are more of a treat, and we couldn't really call it health food, but maybe a little bit, I guess you could say, good for the soul, but those are the ones that we need to be careful of too. Also with mindful eating, one area that a lot of people focus on is pausing before eating or pause before you treat yourself. So if you have that craving, pause and ask yourself, first of all, why do I have this craving? Why do I want to help myself to the food? And can I stop at just one? If you feel like it's going to turn into, I've had one, now I want another, then you need to also ask yourself, well, when will it be enough? Will I have a stopping point that is reasonable for me? Because for some people, if there's a habit of eating, say, a whole bag or more than one serving, then that might be a time to pause and analyze that. Some other tricks that you can use that will help manage your treats, because you still should allow yourself to treat yourself, is one, to be intentional with that. So if you want some indulgences, pick one or two that you really want, or that somebody cooks the best, what have you, and keep those in mind, and then consider scheduling when you will actually have them. If you have something to look forward to, that can be very helpful. So also a similar vein is to save your choices for those 5-star options. We all know that there are certain foods. I had that picture of candy corn earlier. Now, there are some people who love candy corn, but for me personally, it is far from a 5-star treat. And I'm not going to waste my calories on something like that that's merely okay, when I could maybe have something that I know is delicious. And if you don't know whether something is good or delicious, but you're at maybe an event where there's a variety of options, it's okay to allow yourself one bite of each. And then once you've picked out the best, so you give each one a ranking, the best one is the one you finish. And finally, the concept of out of sight and out of mind really can help quite a few people. If you have a dish of candy or some other sweets out in the open and easily available every time you walk by, that's what you're going to choose. Rather, either have it completely out of sight and no real substitute, or have a bowl of fresh cut fruit or something else that's easily snackable, but maybe not quite as calorie dense and not nutrient dense. Then address what satisfies. So this is where I wanted to touch on, maybe none of these sweets sound good. Maybe all Halloween candy is just a little much for you, but you do still have that desire to have something to treat yourself, especially during this time. So there were a few alternative ideas I had seen. So if you crave chocolate, there's nothing wrong with chocolate. Try to aim for dark chocolate, of course, and maybe add some raspberries or strawberries. And that way you have a very nice, a little more balanced food and a little more healthful as well. If you like salty and sweet, then nuts roasted with honey would be a really nice option. And for crunchy, I think popcorn is one of the easiest, although I do know that those edamame, those dried edamame beans, or the Quest chips, those are also some very good options that add some protein. And finally, for warm and cozy, apple cider, unfortunately, deep down, it is just juice, if we will. I mean, that's a very basic way of putting it, but there's not a lot else to it. Warm chai, as long as it's not overly sweetened, will still have that warm fall feeling, but won't necessarily pack that sugar punch. It does depend on where you're getting the chai, of course, because I do know there's plenty out there that's very high in sugar. So read the label. I did want to touch on managing guilt, though I talked about this, I believe, last week. And I do think this is an area that plagues many people, not just people on GLP-1 medications, but a good number of people in the world. And so just remember that it is about progress. It's not about perfection. So taking that one piece of candy has not undone all the work that's led up to it. You can ask yourself, are you doing well 80 to 90% of the time? That's what matters. It's not about the 100% of the time. I salute you if you're able to do 95%, but just remember, it's about perspective and about your habits. And what if you go past one piece of candy? Now are we derailed? I think what can actually be helpful is don't allow this to be the time to shame yourself and say, what am I doing? I've completely undone this and it's myself to blame. But in fact, use that moment as the time to reflect and look inward by saying, okay, why did I overindulge this time? What was going on that led to that? What things set me up for this path? And what can I do differently next time? Was it about a party, an emotion? Was it about the availability? What can you change that will help prevent you from going down that path? And also make sure to allow yourself those indulgences. If you fully deprive yourself, while I do know there are some people who do this with success, for many people that's very often unsustainable because food is social, food is delicious, food should be enjoyed. And so sometimes that can be an unsustainable thing to maintain. And then we oftentimes will overdo it when we take ourselves off of the deprivation mode. So to check on challenges for the week, I would encourage you to try out one or two of the strategies we discussed in the earlier slides. So I'm repeating them over again. We talked about pausing before indulging in something. If you feel just a craving suddenly come on and it wasn't planned, stop and ask yourself, am I actually hungry? What is making me crave this? Or is it something else? I think I've mentioned to people to think to yourself, would I eat something boring? And if the food that you think is boring, if you're not hungry for that, then chances are that you're not truly, truly hungry. And sometimes giving yourself that time to pause and step back and reflect is all you need. Also, intentional indulgences. If you know there's going to be something that you're looking forward to eating and you are going to have it sometime later this week, that's okay. Plan for it, maybe even schedule it, because then that's something you can look forward to on Friday evening, or maybe Saturday after, a full day. You'll be like, at the end of the day, I know I can have this and I can't wait. So pick your time and pick your one treat, maybe two, it sort of depends, and have that scheduled, and that's something you can treat yourself with at the appropriate time. And in the meantime, remove those other easy available, the candy jar, move that out of view, out of sight, out of mind, just so that way you're only looking forward to the treats that you've scheduled. We talked about some of those healthy swap outs, so you can stock up on having these, where if you still feel like guilt can be a problem for you, maybe as long as you know that there's some healthy element to what you're choosing, maybe if that makes you feel better, have some of these swap outs available, like the dark chocolate and berries, or candied, I do mean very lightly candied, but some nuts, or the popcorn by itself, or with a drizzle of dark chocolate. And the last one, which is my personal favorite, is the 5-star or 1-bite only rule. So pick the best of the best that's out there and let yourself enjoy that. These candies on the right, I believe, are sort of notorious for being the least favorite for many people. So don't indulge in those, though maybe you don't even want the 1 bite, just 5 stars only. So to put it all together, just remember, cravings can get the best of all of us. And we're all aware that challenges oftentimes do increase during the holidays. That's when everybody's baking comes out. And we also have that added nostalgia from holidays in the past, but also added stressors usually. Remember to take the time to tune in to your cravings. Don't let yourself feel out of control, but really look into why you crave, what you crave, and when. Remember to plan your treats ahead of time or plan your environment, whether or not something will be available or not. You could even donate certain candies if you just need them out of the house. But with all this said, even if you have some unplanned treats, maybe the environment wasn't ideal, don't let guilt overtake you. Just remember to let those moments educate you on what you might want to do differently next time. And of course, I'd like to just suggest that you challenge yourself this week. Try one of those techniques, and I'd be very interested to see how that goes. And with that, as with every week, I like to open this up for questions. So feel free to hit that question at the bottom left hand of your screen, and I'll be happy to answer. I'll wait for just a few moments. All right, and with that, I hope you have a wonderful Halloween weekend and that you enjoy your treats mindfully. And as always, I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.